Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to episode 2. Today we will be discussing Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. The Prophet ﷺ gave a testimony saying that if there were to be a prophet after me, it would be Umar radiallahu anhu. Michael Hart, the author, spoke about him in his book, The 100 Most Influential People. He ranked Prophet ﷺ as number 1 and Umar radiallahu anhu as number 52. His most notable traits are his justice, differentiating between true and false, which is why he earned the title of Farouk, his extreme humility, and his transformation from being unjust to becoming a symbol of justice. So let's begin. He was 13 years younger than the Prophet ﷺ, so he was 27 years old at the time of prophethood. He was light-skinned and he had a really strong stature. He was Sarif al-Quraysh, meaning he was an ambassador for Quraysh. In pre-Islamic life, he was engaged in evils such as worshipping idols, alcohol, and womanizing. He was literate and he was a successful businessman. When he saw that people were migrating to Abyssinia, he felt bad that people had to leave their homes just because they were Muslim. But his wealth, status, and the respect that people had for him kept him away from Islam. At first, he didn't really like Prophet ﷺ and his companions, and Abu Jahl was his mom's brother, meaning his uncle. So once during early Islam, Abu Jahl beat up Prophet ﷺ. When news of this reached Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's uncle Hamza radiallahu anhu, he in return came and he hit Abu Jahl. And when Umar radiallahu anhu found out about this, he became super angry and he wanted to kill the Prophet ﷺ. He pulled a sword and left his house to kill the Prophet ﷺ. On his way, he met Naim, who told him that Umar radiallahu anhu should probably check his sister, Jamil Fatima bin Kattab radiallahu anha, since she and her husband, Sa'id ibn Zayd radiallahu anhu, accepted Islam. When Umar radiallahu anhu reached his sister's house, Khabab bin Arath radiallahu anhu was teaching Quran to Umar radiallahu anhu's sister and her husband. Umar radiallahu anhu got really mad about this and he hit his sister and her husband, but seeing his sister bleeding, he softened a little bit and asked to see what it was they're reading. He eventually read Surah Taha and understood what Islam was really about. He was then ready to accept Islam. He then went to Darul Arqam and accepted Islam. He was the 40th man entering into Islam. During this time, where Muslims were being persecuted, Prophet ﷺ made a dua to have either Abu Jahl or Umar radiallahu anhu enter Islam to help strengthen the religion. So when this dua came true and Umar radiallahu anhu accepted Islam, Prophet ﷺ was really happy about it. After accepting Islam, he told Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to go and pray near the Kaaba as a Jamaat. He and Hamza radiallahu anhu, who was the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, were leading the Muslims in 2 rows of 20 people. He announced his migration to Medina boldly, and he challenged anyone who wanted to try and stop him, but nobody dared. At one time, during the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, he was really upset that they couldn't perform Umrah and were heading back to Medina, that he ended up arguing with the Prophet ﷺ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down Surah Fatah, and because of this, Umar radiallahu anhu cried because he felt bad about how he spoke to the Prophet ﷺ. As said in the last episode, after Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu passed away, Umar radiallahu anhu became the next caliph, the Amirul Mu'mineen, meaning the leader of the Muslims. His caliphhood lasted 10 years, and within these 10 years, he expanded the Muslim empire from borders to borders. I'll just be mentioning a few highlights from his caliphhood and the new concepts that he introduced, so I'm just going to list these off for you guys. One, he introduced the Hijri calendar. So the calendar that we use today, that was by Umar radiallahu anhu. He arranged the Taraweeh Salah as a Jamaat. He created a proper army to defend the country. He also created a police department and he began to maintain the roads and building new roads between the cities. He also introduced a drainage system and a birth and death registrar. He also decided to give an allowance to those who would become a hafiz. He created a treasury which would spend on the poor and the non-Muslims. He also created taxes on imported goods. And he decided that coins should probably have a specific weight, like 50 cents, $1, $2. And he said we should never destroy the worship places of others. He also introduced senior and child benefits, and he began to measure the lands and houses. Also, the last thing he did was night patrols as the police by himself. So these measures that we're seeing today were originally introduced by Umar radiallahu anhu. In the 18th Hijri, a huge drought hit the Arabian Peninsula, and 60,000 refugees came to Medina, in which 40,000 of them died. So he made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, asking that the entire Muslim ummah doesn't finish because of this drought. There wasn't really much to eat, so whatever he did have to eat, he would give those to others, but this caused him to become malnourished and caused his skin to darken. Finally, the rain came and the drought was over. His justice was also really well known. When he went to Jerusalem, he didn't pray in the church, even though the priest welcomed him to. Umar radiallahu anhu refused because he didn't want Muslims replacing churches with masjids. If you recall, and previously I said that he said to never destroy the worship places of other religions. So instead, he prayed outside the church, and the spot that he prayed is now a masjid. He was also really against slavery, and his famous statement, "How can you take a person as a slave who is born free?" This statement is actually written on the American legislature. There was also a plague like the coronavirus in the Jerusalem area where 25,000 people died. Umar radiallahu anhu visited there from Medina at the border of Jerusalem. Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu, who is also part of the Ashra Mubashara, mentioned a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that said that we should not enter into an area where there is a plague, and if we are already in that area, we shouldn't leave the area to stop the spreading of whatever the virus or the bacteria is. The plague ended after the concept of quarantine was introduced. So after learning that hadith, Umar radiallahu anhu returned back from the border of Jerusalem. Finally, at the end, he was martyred while he was leading the Fajr Salah by Abu Lulu Majusi. He stabbed Umar radiallahu anhu 6 times with a poisoned dagger. Umar radiallahu anhu died 3 days later. He is also buried next to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. So, what we need to take away from this story is the justice that Umar radiallahu anhu had for others, and we need to bring this into our lives and try to be just with the others that people around us. All right, so thank you for joining me for this episode, and I will see you in the next one. Assalamu alaikum.